Yellow and Red mix by Digits 27 in Chapter 51. Naruto managed to land another strong blow on Hidan's chest for all the good it did him. The silver-haired man flew across the room. The two had found themselves in. Naruto didn't know where by this point. Their fight had been so mobile that Naruto had completely lost track of where he was or even the way back to the main hall. Right now, they were in a medium-sized room with what was once a smooth, polished floor, bringing into question what this place used to be used for. However, it was covered in dust and crumbling masonry from the neglected and old walls. Hidan picked himself out of the crater he had been thrown into. He had long ago gotten over his anger and was back to his usual psychotic glee. This was one of the best fights in his life. Nobody ever lasted as long as the blonde in front of him, and extra weight made everything even more exciting. The moment where he sacrificed this one to Jashin would be long remembered and cherished in his eternal life. What's the point? What's the point of fighting it, Blondie? No matter what you do, I can't die. Naruto huffed for a moment, despite his near eternal stamina. The fight was really starting to wear on. He was going to have to do something about that soon. Yeah, I'd ask how you did that, but I already know, and I didn't particularly like that answer. Hidan just smiled. He was only a little put off that this teen knew so much about the organization, or specifically him, but it wouldn't matter for much longer. I was merely willing to go the extra mile than the rest of the idiots that so-called Jossinism wouldn't. They wouldn't know the first thing about Josin-sama. Naruto just nodded in exasperation, having caught his second wind. The two combatants began to slowly circle one another, each on one side of the fairly large room. If he had looked closely enough as they circled, Hidan might have noticed that Naruto would seem to flicker ever so often as they moved. Unfortunately for him, the room was dark and Hidan was more focused on the ceremony he had yet to perform. Naruto took a deep breath, smiled, and prayed to whatever gods that were listening except Jashin that this would work. He rushed forward for once, initiating the combat as he dived under one of Hidan's blows, only to spring up onto his hands. Hidan was only momentarily confused by the action, but figured it only made it easier for him to deal with the whelp. Naruto stayed on his hands, fending off Hidan's scythe with his feet, while using his clawed hands to maintain a steady grip on the floor. His legs were a little more powerful than his hands, so thanks to his extraordinary balance, he was able to launch off rapid blows while constantly evading Hidan's mad swings. Nice trick. Were you in the fucking circus? Naruto ignored him, but smiled as he was reminded of the ways that he talked. Slowly, he began to lead Hidan around in a spiral that steadily moved inwards towards the center of the room. Never once did he drop off his hands. Hidan was actually starting to grow annoyed. The kicks or the punches came in hard and fast, leaving bruises across his rapid healing body. Finally, Naruto feigned before rolling under Hidan's legs. On the way through, he caught them and pulled as hard as he could. Hidan was pulled out from underneath him, landing with a crack on his back. He would have rubbed his head from the pain if Naruto hadn't sprung to his feet and like lightning pinned all of his limbs to the floor with elongated kunai. Naruto took a breath while Hidan struggled against his bindings, uncaring of the pain the action brought him. You think this will help me? You think this will hold me long, you faggot? I'd rip my own arms off to appease Jashin-sama. Naruto just rolled his eyes and threw a kunai at the man's neck, squarely severing his body from his head from his body. He wasn't usually one for such a brutal treatment of a prisoner, but he figured this was a special case. You can't silence Jashin-sama. When Kakasu deals with those bitches and retouches my head, I'll gouge your fucking eyes out. Naruto just sighed and put his head in his hands before walking over to where Hidan's head was rolling about. He picked him up and looked at him. Their eyes meeting as the disobedient head stared down at the jerky. Naruto just smiled and threw Hidan's head over his shoulder, watching it land on his own chest with a dull thump. Naruto ignored more of his enraged anger shots and waited as he moved over to the man's hands and took his Akatsuki ring. He then moved to his other hand and pried out his Jashin symbol. Then when this was over, he was going to have to investigate that. Hidan was still uttering curses and various obscenities by the time Naruto picked him up again. Hey, how long does your mentality last without a sacrifice to Joshin? Hidan's eyes twitched at the disrespectful way he spoke about his god before he tried to bite Naruto to no avail. Fuck you, heathen! I'm not telling you anything! Naruto smiled, which made Hidan quiet down for just a moment. You just told me everything I needed to know. He held up his hand a little higher and turned Hidan so he could look around. Do you see that? Hidan tried to look at what the blonde was trying to point out. He would have shaken his head if he still had neck muscles or attached to it to look at look harder. Like he on scowled and was about to berate Naruto again when he spotted the faint pattern that encircled his decapitated body. He looked again and saw intricate seals occasionally dotting the room, all centered around his body. Oh, you see it. He does look at fury returned as he tried to move in Naruto's iron grip, and that's a sealing array. Now, usually you can't seal a human, especially an alive one. But I found a way while I was working on my signature move. It's what lets me move through sealing arrays despite having chakra. He smiled a bit more casually, like he was just lecturing the student instead of explaining his opponent's defeat. So I seal you away. You can't sacrifice to Joshin anymore, and. Then what? For possibly the first time in Hidan's immortality life, a look of fear passed over his features, and he gulped, widening Naruto's smile. He was speechless. He had never feared death before, partly because he thought he was immune to it. Yet here he was looking down at his own body, having his own slow death explained to him. I will fucking kill you. I'll rip your arms off, then your legs, and make it as slow as I possibly can. Then Naruto had grown tired of listening to his insane opponent continue to speak, and had covered up his mouth. When the disobedient head tried to bite him, he simply tossed it back onto his body before bending down and passing chakra through a nearby seal. The room glowed briefly as the seal slid up, and Naruto cheerfully waved to his vanishing opponent. Bye-bye. The glow stopped, and Naruto looked back over to see that Hidan's body, and thankfully his head had disappeared. He stood up and cracked his back. All that time on his hands really put a strain on his back and wrist, not to mention the fact he was forced to use swift release in order to write out his seals without Hidan noticing. In all, he felt pretty drained. He sucked it up though, and turned to face the corridor he had entered. He could return and move Hidan into its role later. For now, he had to get back to Tayuya and the others somehow. Tayuya flipped over another fireball. The creature chasing her seemed to have an infinite supply of them and wasn't shy about using them. It was like dodging rapid fire kunai, except hotter, and she couldn't dodge them by only a little bit or risk a third-degree burns. Already she had to dive through the water to prevent herself from losing half her arm. Never had she thanked her medical skills so much. She had already lost count of all the time she had tried killing the damn creature. Electrocution didn't work. Cutting it didn't work. Setting fire to it didn't work. Trying to crush it with debris didn't work. She was frustrated beyond relief. The only thing she had found that seemed to remotely work was vibrating the damn thing. It seemed to loosen the connection it had between itself and Kakasu, except that she couldn't do it enough to fully sever the tie. All she could do right now was dodge it and continue trying different ways of killing him. She heard the crackle of air as another fireball was launched her way. Charging up her staff, she turned and tried to swap it back at her pursuer, only for it to bend its body out of the way and fire yet another ball. Gurren wasn't interfering much better. Kakasu had been very smart when he sent his lightning master after her. All her crystal attacks proved useless. She would attempt to capture the creature only for it to coat itself in lightning chakra and burst out. Trying to screw it on a needle crystal or with her hexagonal shuriken only resulted in it shrugging off the blows like they were nothing. And then she had its attacks to deal with. It could create a constant stream of lightning from its mouth, which could slowly chase her down. Despite using lightning attacks and not having much effort on her crystal armor, and she had learned firsthand that this much more concentrated version could melt straight through it. She was running through the room, clutching her side in pain as she tried to stay out of the way of water or risk getting secondhand electrocuted from a stray shot. She heard the now now familiar sizzles of air being burned off the mask creature. As the mask creature charged up for another attack, she dodged to the side, erecting a wall of crystals behind her as she ran. She heard the discharge of energy as the thread creature let loose with another bolt of deadly lightning. She looked behind her in time to see it impact with the wall of crystal, expecting it to shatter under the attack. She raised an arm to shield her eyes. What she didn't expect was for the bolt to pass straight through the shield, not damaging it, but getting screwed off to one side as it went through. She looked back and forth between her shield and the wall that now held a nasty burn mark before a smirk found its way onto her lips. That could work. Yujito, despite knowing that now Kakusu's earth heart was gone, he was vulnerable, wasn't happy about it. Vulnerable wasn't a good word to describe Kakusu in any way. Staying at a distance proved difficult with his deadly water techniques and incredible chakra capability. Getting close was suicide thanks to those damn threads, and anywhere in between was dangerous because the man was fairly unpredictable now that he was taking the fight seriously. Cutting the threads that composed his body proved to be impossible, even with razor sharp claws. Anytime that she thought she could actually manage to do it, he would just disperse it into a rush of water, indicating an annoying use of the water clone. Then came his counterattack. He had already used the water dragon jutsu to start in effect. The damn craters in the walls around her serving as testament to that. His arsenal of jutsu seemed nearly endless, and each one was executed perfectly. She had never met anybody with such a master of water and element before. Suddenly, her thoughts were cut short as she felt a very strong hand wrap around her throat. Her eyes opened wide in panic as she looked around, only to see the patchwork hand she was held by connected to Kakusu's body by a long length of the threads. The man smiled behind his mask as she slowly drew his hands back towards his body, squeezing a little harder around the woman's neck. He brought her closer so that she was looking at him right in his eyes, right in his oddly colored eyes. You are lucky that we are not here to kill you. Then again, with what the Koski have planned with you, perhaps death would be a blessing. In either case, I'm going to have to ask for more money. You silly girls have already cost me 2 hearts. He smiled disappointedly as Yujito started to feel darkness encroach on her vision, loosening herself to unconsciousness. Taiyo turned on a dime, flipping herself up and over the creature as she firmly planted her staff in its back. With enormous bursts of lightning chakra, she attempted to once again electrocute the creature in the water that covered the floor. It only paused for a moment before she watched in sick fascination as the mask twisted 180 degrees to look at her. The mouth opened and her eyes widened before she pushed off again, moving as fast as she could to escape the enormous fireball the black threaded creature unleashed. Tayuya, I need your help. The red-headed looked up encouragingly at Gurren, who was busy flipping across the wall to avoid the great beam of lightning and trying to cook her. I'm a little busy. Gurren just grunted as she erected another wall of crystals between herself and the lightning mask. It wouldn't hold long, so using that opportunity, she sprinted over to Tayuya, sending enough critical crystal shuriken at the fire mask to momentarily hold it up. She quickly explained her plan before the two of them were forced back into fleeing their respective masks. Tayuya didn't particularly like it. It sounded far too risky, but she didn't have anything else, so she had to go with it. Summoning jutsu! With a brief moment of the respite earned by passing more lightning chakra through the water, she slammed her hand down. After the smoke cleared, a large falcon, the size of a large dog, appeared beside her, its eyes widening as both it and Tayuya dodged to the side to avoid a large ball of fire. Hayamizu, I need your help. The seemingly larger than possible falcon just nodded, its wings already moving about in intricate spirals as the water began to respond. Tayuya ran to where Gurren was already preparing her part of the plan, forming large circular objects out of her crystals. Tayuya knew that Hayamizu could only give her so much time, so as soon as she saw an opportunity, she rushed in between them. Time seemed to slow down for both of them as light began crackling around the mask's mouth. If this didn't work, then Gurren was about to be turned into a lightning rod, something she didn't think she would survive. To dive through the air, intercepting the bolt of lightning with her staff as the metal absorbed the energy like a sponge, using her own chakra to prevent herself getting fried. Taiyo quickly twisted through the air, moving her staff out in front of her. Her hands trembling from holding back all the power in her staff, and she released it all in one blast directly at the crystal Gurren had created. And she made sure to release it all before she touched back down, preventing any other energy from being grounded. The bolt hit dead in the center of the circular crystal, and there was a moment's delay before it came blasting out to the other side. The lens focused it, condensing it into an even more powerful bolt as it was released directly at Kakuzu. It soared through the air, splitting molecules from its intensity before impacting with Kakuzu's side, not stopping. The blast rippled right through his torso, leaving a sizzling hole through both sides of his body. Yujito could only watch as Kakuzu's eyes widened momentarily before the grip he had around her throat loosened and she fell to the wet floor. The two masks froze for a moment before both suddenly rushed to their master's aid, both unraveling as they went. The fire mask would have reached him first if Gurren hadn't suddenly placed both hands on the ground. In its confused and hurried state, the mask could do nothing as the crystal spear shot out of the ground, splitting the mask in half as the heart it concealed was skewered. The lightning mask did make it to Tagiyo's body, absorbing it as his wrecked heart was replaced again. He stood up, fear in his eyes when he realized that he was down to his last heart. He had survived the first Shinobi War, gone toe to toe with Hashirama Senju himself, and harnessed the most powerful kinjutsu in Takegakure. He was not going to die here to a bunch of women barely out of their diapers. With a roar of annoyance, he thrust both his hands into the water that covered the floor. Lightning style discharged lightning calamity. Faster than most could blink, arcs of electricity spread through the wet floor. All three women were caught unprepared as they cried out in pain, their bodies almost glowing from the sheer amount of lightning passing through their bodies. Kakuzu didn't let up until he saw their bodies smoking, completely uncaring that he was killing his target. Finally, he stopped and the woman's locked up bodies were allowed to rigidly fall to the floor, still twitching. Kakuzu just smirked. He wasn't dying today. That smirk fell right off his face as he jerked forward, spitting out blood as he did so. His eye went wide as he looked down to see 5 razor-sharpened fingernails, the end of a metal bow staff, and numerous sharpened crystals piercing his body. He gulped, trying to stop the blood flowing from his mouth as his eyes blinked rapidly. He looked back at the cooked bodies floating in the water, only for them to dissolve away. He tried to speak, but his words caught in his throat before he fell to the water dead for good this time. Tagiyo twirled her staff, readying it of blood, as Yujito did the same, both retracting their respective weapons, while Gurren just let her crystal dissolve back into the air. They all looked down at the body in front of them, while Tagiyo prodded it with her foot, watching it drift lazily in the water. Tagiyo just smiled happily, despite having come so close to death more than a few times in the fight. And Naruto thinks that ninjutsu has no impact in a fight. The woman to her right and left just sweat dropped as they looked at her incredulously. Why couldn't you have done that sooner? Tagiyo just shrugged as she turned to Gurren. I'm sorry, I was too busy trying to not become a Tagiyo flambe. Yujito was still looking down at the body floating in the tepid waters, amazed at how close she had come to dying or getting kidnapped. It doesn't matter, he's dead, and all of us will be fine. Tagiyo just turned to her with a smirk. Oh look, at Miss Glass half full. If you'll remember, it was me and Gurren who saved your ass. Yujito just scowled. Hey, it was my idea. Taya just looped an arm around Gurin's shoulder. Yeah, but it was my awesomeness that made it happen. There was a moment of silence in the room before all three women burst out laughing. The situation too much for them. It was that scene that Naruto rushed in on, looking ready for a fight as he quickly surveyed the room. What he hadn't expected was to find the three women laughing while Kakasu's dead body drifted lazily around in the water. He looked around, spotting the numerous signs of an intense fight in the form of smoking or damn craters or large trenches of smoldering earth. Wow, what happened here? All three women turned to see Naruto, two of them signing in relief that he was okay. Naruto walked over as they all looked around the room, seeing the damage they did for the first time. Not much shithead, just kicking some ass. Naruto wasn't sure whether to back away slowly from the chuckling woman or go over to hug Tayuya. He decided on the latter, and after a few giggles from Yujito and Guren, he separated, walking over to Kakasu's body before flipping it over with his foot. Carefully, he slipped the man's ring off before putting it with the others. It took him a few moments to seal away Kakasu's body, but once he was done, he stood back up. Okay, I just have to go back and collect Hidan's body, then we'll probably have to report all this to the Raikage. He received a round of nods from the woman before Tayuya looked at the scroll in Naruto's hand. So who gets the bounty on that guy's head? Everyone switched off while Tayuya just looked around. What? The redhead was still holding the two scrolls incredulously, looking up at the group of people that had killed two of the most dangerous S-rat criminals in the world. He had a right to be skeptical, but once Naruto had shown him Kakasu's body and Hidan's head, which wouldn't shut up, he was convinced. Seeing a disembodied head scream obscenities at him was an eye-opening experience for the normally stoic Raikage. In the end, he had a sigh from relief when Naruto resealed Hidan back into the scroll. He would be calling home for the foreseeable future. Not only that, but Naruto had dealt with the man single-handedly. He wasn't sure what to make of that and had to reevaluate just how powerful the teen in front of him was. He now had Hidan's scythe slung over his shoulder, and all he would say about it was that he had taken a shine to it after seeing how effective it was in a fight. The Raikage decided not to question it, as he simply wanted the group out of his office before his headache got any worse. After the group had collected their respective bounties, the three girls splitting Kakasu's evenly, and Naruto claiming Hidan's in its entirety, they walked out of the office with Yujito staying behind him. I'm glad you're okay, Yujito. B wouldn't have forgiven me himself if anything happened to you. The blonde just nodded, smiling lightly at the thought. She was certain that if B hadn't been away on a mission, then he would have been right there with Naruto and the others. Thanks, Naruto, Guren, and Tayuya. But without them, I'm certain I wouldn't have made it. A nodded solemnly. He knew this already, and he would be writing a personal note of thanks to the Kazekage. I know you've had a recent traumatic time because of the Koski, but that's why I believe my next request is important. I want you to find out how they got into our village so easily, find it and stop it so it can never happen again. You might be safe now, but we have no way of telling if they will try this again. Yujito nodded, giving a cheeky salute to the Raikage as he just smiled. And be careful, Yujito. Kami knows your parents will haunt me if anything happens to you. Try it again, Tayuya. The redhead just grunted as she got an irritated look at Naruto, quieting the blonde up. I already have 7 times. Naruto just nodded while Tayuya continued to strain. They had been trying to work out how Tayuya could activate her new seal all day long. It proved more of a challenge than Naruto had foreseen. The regional curse spark latched onto feelings of anger and hatred, but without that aspect, Tayuya was having difficulty finding its trigger. They had already tried the obvious anger of channeling chakra in the area, but all that got her was a light tingling sensation from the seal. Well, the original seal used emotions as a trigger. Maybe we just need to find out another that will activate the new seal. Tayuya just sighed, really hoping that the trigger was frustration, because then she would have it working out. She would have it worked out in seconds. You made the damn seal. Why don't you know what fucking activates it? Not just shrugged as he smiled sheepishly. Hey, I couldn't predict everything. Tayo just scowled in his direction as he held up a place in the hand. Alright, why don't we take a break for a while and go get some dango or something? Tayo just nodded with a small relieved smile as Naruto walked over, wrapped her up from behind in a warm hug. Tayo's frustrations melted away as he pulled her in close, resting his head on her shoulder as she leaned back into his body. Tayo felt the excitement run through her body as the blonde planted a small but loving kiss on her neck, then another slightly higher up as he worked his way around her mouth. She turned her head to make it easier, and soon they were both pressed up they were pushed up against one another, their tongues wrestling playfully. Tayo smiled into the contact, and Naruto brought his legs up so that she was straddling his thigh. This was a fairly common sight with them now. They were practically inseparable. She suddenly felt a strange sensation in her shoulders, and thinking that Naruto had kissed her too hard, if such a thing was possible, she just carried on. However, when Naruto opened his eyes, they widened, making her pull back in confusion. What? He just pointed at her as she looked down on her body, not seeing anything out of the ordinary. He took off his headband and held it up so that she could look at her reflection in the polished metal. She gasped at what she saw. Her hair had grown much longer, becoming a light shade of pink. Her skin hadn't changed at all, thankfully, but her eyes were different. The irises were larger, and her pupils had vanished completely. That's when she noticed that she suddenly felt stronger, like she just made more energy, like she just had more energy running through her body. Naruto too was looking her over, feeling the slight shift as her chakra suddenly increased. They both knew what she had activated. They both knew that she had activated the seal, not really understanding why, until Taiyo suddenly groaned, falling to her knees. Oh, come on! Naruto just looked at her oddly while she continued to sulk. What is it? Naruto just looked up hopelessly as she rubbed the spot where the seal was glowing a warm blue. I have a seal that gives me awesome powers, but it's activated by fucking love. How stupid is that? Naruto's sweat dropped comically as he took in the sulking Tayuya. He moved away and pulled her back onto her feet. Well, we don't know it was that. It could have been, Tayuya looked up at him strangely, not catching what he meant until she saw his slight blush and her eyes opened wide. A smirk found its way onto her face as she rubbed it up against him slightly, which made him once again notice that fact that her endowed seemed to grow while under the influence of the marker. Oh, so seal activated by lust. I guess that's slightly less stupid. Naruto just chuckled as he took the hint and captured Tayuya's lips with his own, earning himself a moan from the red-headed turned pinkette. They parted after a minute, both panting with smiles plastered over their faces. It could be either, but the important thing is we found something that triggers it. He smirked to himself, making Taiyo wonder what was going through his head. Now comes the fun part, seeing what you can do. Taiyo grew her own smirk as she settled back into a fighting stance. Naruto doing the same. Well, fucking bring it, shithead. B looked over the wrecked training ground, noting the numerous scorched marks and craters which littered the plateau. Right in the center of it, all laid Taiyo and Naruto. The former stood startling the latter as they furiously made out. Half their clothes seemed to be either ripped or burnt off, and their modesty was only saved by a few strips of fabric. Not that the couple seemed to mind in the slightest. B wasn't sure whether to leave or grab a chair, but in the end he cleared his throat loudly, shocking the duo out of their makeout session. Oh, hey B, sorry about the training ground. B just raised an eyebrow while Taiyo pouted at being interrupted, apparently not caring at the only thing covering her was Naruto by this point. Don't worry about it, little nine. Someone will clean this up just fine. Naruto nodded. He was a bit worried that they had gone too far in their spar, but they didn't let it get to him. So what do you need? B smiled broadly. Big Bro wants to see you. Better go grab Miss 7-2. I got some visitors you'll want to see. So he sent a messenger in the form of one killer B. Naruto nodded, standing up as he clutched at his pants, which threatened to fall down. Thanks, B. We'll go as soon as we... He looked around to Taiyo, who was hiding behind him, so B wouldn't see him. Get some other clothes. The large rapper just nodded before leaving. He swore he saw something different about Taiyo, but he couldn't place it. End of chapter 51.